Rick and Morty, Full Meta Jackrick. That's the title. Let's get into it. After a sudden 5-week hiatus, Rick and Morty Season 6 is back, with an episode that conveyed a lot of frustration between the Rick and Morty writers and Adult Swim, while also serving as a fun sequel to Season 4's insane story train episode. Is Rick and Morty fed up with its own abundance of meta humor? Is the reason that Rick and Morty will never become a show where the story advances every other episode simply because the executives won't let them? Are we stuck in perpetually trying to recreate the magic of Season 1? As always, we're going to dive into the episode for its deeper meaning and provide an answer to these questions, because as a viewer, someone who's witnessing only the final product and none of the in-between stages, you may be surprised. Spoilers ahead. Also, before I forget, if you're a fan of the channel, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications. It helps us out a bunch. Thank you. On to the video. So to recap, this episode is kind of insane. Much like the story train episode that it acts as a sort of sequel towards, so much happens in 22 minutes. It's so dense and it moves so fast. It just makes you feel dumb. I felt dumb watching this episode, like I didn't understand it. But that being said, we're gonna try our best anyways. So the episode actually opens with a previously on Rick and Morty segment that at first seems real. We see Summer pregnant, Jerry dies from bees, we get the Sherlock scene from the opening, but as it gets crazier and crazier, Rick kind of wisens up to what's going on and actually uses the power of the segment to break out of it. Turns out the whole thing was actually this weird bug creature named Previous Leon. If you get the title, you're smart. They get carried through the theme song, it's pretty funny, and it leads to them fighting Leon, only for him to rip reality and escape past the fourth wall. Rick and Morty chase after him, and they're in this weird meta world that's outside of the fourth wall. It's really on the nose, and the show lets you know that repeatedly. This is when we're reintroduced to the story train villain Story Lord, who's teamed up with Jesus as per the ending of the last episode. I guess he escaped that situation, tricked Rick and Morty into coming to him so that he can escape and find his real motivation. They get into a fight, but ultimately he escapes, leaving Rick and Morty stranded in the weird meta reality outside of the fourth wall. This is where things go from weird to just flat out confusing. Back in the real world, Story Lord finds the man who wrote him. To us, it looks like a Dan Harmon insert, especially because of all of his writing styles on the wall behind him, but that's not confirmed. Also, it kind of just looks like him, but who knows, right? Story Lord demands that he gives his character motivation, to which he quips, "Your motivation is motivation," but instead of that shutting him up, Story Lord runs with that, they team up, and things only get worse from here. Meanwhile, back on the other side of the fourth wall, Rick and Morty go and find the Story 6, a superhero group made up of storytelling tropes. It's fun. There's like a continuity person, there's a twist guy, they all have really clever names that I don't have them memorized, but you know, you watch the episode, they're pretty on the nose. But it turns out Rick's plan is to double cross them and break out a dangerous villain named Retcon with the power to permanently retcon reality. He's my favorite part of the episode. His power is so OP and interesting. They end up breaking him out, and then he immediately causes chaos, eventually retconning the entire universe into an orange. I don't know how he came up with that, but hey, it happens. Rick and Morty eventually escape this somehow. That's not really clear. I'm not gonna ask too many questions. But anyways, they almost die in the cold on the other side of the fourth wall, but they get saved by, of all people, Joseph Campbell, the prolific and historic writer, and a major Harmon writing influence. We'll get to that later. He saves them, gives them soup, haha, and helps them get back to the real world by way of crazy, super confusing Rick and Morty stuff. Morty gets pregnant, he makes some like anti-Semitic remarks, I don't even know. Anyways, it all leads to the machine that helps them get back through the fourth wall into their reality. They return to find that Story Lord and his writer have created a machine that drains everybody's motivation and gives it to Story Lord. This makes for some pretty funny bits. They ultimately have a showdown. Rick is ripped, by the way, which is something I didn't realize, and Morty teams up with the ghost ethereal projection of Campbell, using his galaxy writing brain to convince the writer to just stop creating, in turn stopping the machine, draining Story Lord of his powers, where he dies at the hand of Rick. For real this time. More specifically at the hands of a Rick plushie, which Rick actually plugs in the episode, leading to a real fake website you can go to. It's pretty funny. The episode ends with the writer insert character basically learning nothing and is about to write another horrible movie. Wrapping up what I consider one of the most confusing episodes of the show. It was one of those Rick and Morty episodes where you can just tell it was like very therapeutic for the writing team and kind of confusing for the viewer. But hey, we're all in this weird relationship, might as well embrace it. That being said, there is so much to unpack with this, so let's just go straight into the breakdown. For as loaded this episode was with their meta commentary, I think the point of this episode revolved around the fact that the team behind Rick and Morty is getting tired of excessive meta humor and the show structure at large, but they don't have as much control over that as one would think, potentially because of the higher-ups getting them funded in the first place. I think a common critique of Rick and Morty over the last few years is that the show can't decide if it wants to be a casual comedy that's not meant to be taken seriously while deconstructing various tropes a la Community, or a dark comedy that actually has something important to say through an overarching narrative about a man who's trying to overcome grief, complete with extensive lore, world building, and thorough character arcs. Rick and Morty has always been meta, but as Rick points out, as soon as the episode hits the ground running, this kind of comedy tends to work better when it's a small nod to the viewer instead of something that takes over the entire episode or undercuts what otherwise would be a sincere emotional moment or meaningful character development. As it turns out, Rick has issues with this too, calling out the fact that the premise of this episode isn't exactly fun. I'm sure this can come off as a little jarring since Rick himself is the master of meta, but I think this is perfectly in line with where his character is at in season 6. Rick previously embraced the excessive meta commentary the show provided because of the exact issue it poses to the viewer. Nothing could be taken seriously and nothing mattered. The mentality that Rick tried to emulate throughout the show's run as a means to keep himself guarded. But now, Rick's let his guard down to both Morty and the audience. Season 6 has seen a Rick that's a bit more vulnerable, one that we haven't seen since season 1. With that growth to his character and no longer treating the show as something with a lack of stakes, he's over the in-your-face meta humor that makes Rick and Morty feel like a parody of itself. Of course, this also serves as commentary on how meta humor has kind of consumed a lot of mainstream media in general. Tons of shows and movies feel the need to constantly be self-aware, breaking the suspension of disbelief and lowering the stakes in the process. It's not even just fourth wall breaks anymore. How many video essays do you see on YouTube rag on the MCU for having the characters point out how silly the whole superhero thing is? Yet despite detesting this kind of humor, Rick and Morty seems to imply that they're forced into it because of how the show is perceived by so many of the people who clinged onto it half a decade ago when it skyrocketed in popularity. So many people know Rick and Morty as that meta show, when in fact its meta commentary was just one of its many strengths way back when. Something that was sprinkled throughout instead of being the main attraction. If you need to be convinced further that this episode was just one large vent by the team, let's touch on that season 1 line. It was pretty telling that the behind the scenes featurette for this episode basically tells us nothing about their intent in approaching this episode. Usually they show how the episode explores the arc of a character or the deconstruction of something that they really wanted to poke fun at, like heist movies. Here, it's just kind of 2 minutes of fun facts around the episode. It comes across like they have nothing to say, and this episode was just made to fill one of the 70 slots Adult Swim ordered. Yet that couldn't be further from the truth, and the truth comes in the form of this line right here.
Do some classic adventures, like season 1.
I'm so sick of that f***ing note. What the f*** does it even mean?
Now, the whole return to season 1 joke is something that's been said a few times in the show now, tracking back to the season 3 finale.
In many ways, things will be like season 1, but more streamlined.
However, this is the first time Rick's actually pushed back against that sentiment, saying he's so sick of that note and he doesn't even know what it means. If you're savvy with the entertainment industry, then you immediately recognized what this meant, but when making anything, whether that be a TV show or a big budget movie, you're going to get notes from the executives, the people in suits who basically dictate the show's future and are partially responsible for keeping the show profitable. These notes can basically come across as demands, and they definitely include the tone and execution of a show. So it seems like since at least season 3, since it's the first time they've made that joke, an executive at Adult Swim has kept Rick and Morty on a leash by constantly tasking the crew to keep it close to season 1. When you look back at season 1, you'd probably see the show's heyday, when it was still fresh and like nothing we'd ever seen before. But to an executive whose job is to keep the show hip with the kids and primed for endless hours of streaming, they see season 1 as something that's safe and episodic with an episode or 2 of lore. That format isn't what made season 1 special. Part of what made me fall in love with Rick and Morty nearly 10 years ago, oh my god, wasn't that it was self-aware and constantly took shots at itself, it was that it knew how to laugh at the tropes itself while still taking the characters and their own struggles seriously. Not to mention there was continuity that I don't think anyone expected, but was more than happy to have around. with Rick and Morty hopping universes, the introduction of the Council of Ricks, Rick's mysterious backstory, and the looming threat of the Galactic Federation. Season 1 built up a lot that Season 2 continued to delve into, but Season 3 is around the point that began to lose the plot. There were still standout episodes for sure, and that goes for Seasons 4 and 5 as well, but that incentive to tune in every week to learn more about the rules of the multiverse and see more layers of Rick's character get peeled back while still having a laugh at the absurdity of whatever mayhem they cooked up that week, that incentive was gone. At least for most people. We were tuning in at 11 p.m. sharp every week. We were real Rick and Morty fans, baby. To Season 6 and even the end of Season 5's credit, it's the first season in years to feel like Season 1 with a status quo reset, continuity ramping up, and the return of genuine emotional moments that aren't always undercut with some sort of joke or jab at the audience. Still, Rick's frustration with that note seems to be the team saying, we don't understand what executives and fans mean when they say more like Season 1. Season 3 tried to have a narrative with the divorce subplot that was followed up on every episode, while still having those episodes be their own adventures. That's kinda like Season 1. But maybe Season 4 is closer to what they were looking for, with only one big continuity-driven episode, the season finale, while the rest are fun one-offs that can connect later if they really want to. Oh, that still isn't quite what you were looking for? How about Season 5? Mostly episodic with some fun continuity in the last 3 episodes that ends on a massive cliffhanger. Still not enough? Fuck it, we don't know what you guys want anymore. This is way more common with TV shows than you may realize, especially animation. When a show gets really popular, the higher-ups funding the whole thing tend to get way more involved because now it's a proven success. Instead of just letting the team rock out and do their thing, they tend to become even more controlling and steer the team into making a show that's more to their liking, a show that they think will replicate the success it's already saw once before. Basically, any story-driven cartoon not made for a streaming service has to deal with this, artificially prolonging a show's overarching narrative by cramming a season's order with one-off adventure after one-off adventure. It's why you see so many fans disregard normal episodes as, quote, filler. You know why we're really here, so just give us the goods. Rick and Morty evidently is not immune to this, which makes sense. It generates more revenue for Warner Discovery than pretty much every Cartoon Network show combined. It makes sense why they want the team to play it safe and keep it in a format that's familiar to a mainstream audience. If Season 6 can nail the landing with its remaining 3 episodes and deliver on another 2-parter, or at least a satisfying season finale, then I would argue that this is the ideal, quote, Season 1 format they so desperately want. It's definitely the most excited people have been for the show in years, even if ratings don't necessarily reflect it, and I believe that comes down to the interesting insight we've gotten into basically every character of the Smith family, and constant nods to the fallout of Season 5's finale. Again, if they can put a neat little bow on this season with a hype ending, this might be the move. But with the show being written 2 years ahead of when we're actually going to get to see the episode, who knows if executives will feel the same way. I don't want it to sound like the team is being held at gunpoint to make any episode that isn't chock full of lore. I'm sure they have a lot of fun writing the abundance of one-off episodes that make up more than 75% of its run, but it's clear that a lot of grievances fans have with the show isn't completely one-sided, and like any popular show, there's just too many cooks in the kitchen, and some of those cooks aren't gonna let the show cook in the oven a little bit longer to become something greater than it already is. While the episode may or may not have been exactly mid-season premiere worthy, I did get enjoyment out of it, and clearly it left us with a lot to say. One thing certain though, Rick and Morty will never not be vocal about how the show's feeling, and it's always crazy to see. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go read up on who Joseph Campbell is, because apparently he's important for writers to know. But as always guys, these are our thoughts on the episode, and we'd love to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let us know in those comments down below, or tweet to us at Roundtable Vids. As always, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay in the loop with all things animation. Thanks for watching guys, this has been a Rick and Morty breakdown. I'll see you next time. Peace.